Story recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain an action, sci-fi, thriller film called Surrogates. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. In the near future, humans have created robots that have replaced people for everyday life. The surrogates, as they call them, are controlled via STEM chairs through neuropathic signals. Humans remain in the safety of their homes as their surrogates live their lives for them. Crime rates plummet and societal living improves as racism and hate dwindle. Around 98% of the population uses surrogates, and it has become the new norm. Recently, groups of people, called Dreads, have started a movement against surrogates. They brand the surrogates as lies and deception. The Dreads have gathered in small isolation zones in cities worldwide and are led by Zaire Powell. On a typical night, a rich young man is chauffeured across town. He tells his driver that their prior destination, the theater, might be a little dull. The driver suggests a club instead, and the man agrees. At the club, the man dances with strangers, and a woman catches his eye. They sneak to the back alley to kiss, and a figure appears. The man tells the figure to leave, calling the figure a meatbag. The two are suddenly bathed in electricity, and the figure rides away. Agent Peters and Agent Greer from the FBI arrive at the scene and finds the man and the woman surrogate. A police officer tells them the male surrogate is unregistered while the female is assigned to someone, but the owner hasn't filed any reports. They see the surrogates have their eyes burnt out, and Greer sees the memory chip on the male surrogate is fried. Greer and Peters then head to the female surrogate's operator's apartment and find him dead with his nose bloody. Greer looks at the last thing the surrogate saw, and he sees the male surrogate's eyes burn and shatter before the feed cuts off. Greer then heads home and takes a glass of water to himself, revealing that Greer is also a surrogate. The surrogate then steps into a closet and parks itself. Greer then gets up from his STEM chair and glances at his surrogate. He steps out of his room and into a kid's room. He sees a photo of him and his wife with a child before closing the door. He sees his wife's surrogate, and Greer suggests a vacation. His wife, Maggie, suggests they could take their surrogates to Hawaii, but Greer wishes to leave the surrogates at home and for them to go out physically. He says they haven't been together in a while, and Maggie appears to get upset. She says they're together every day, but Greer says it's their surrogates that spend the time together. Maggie insists that it's better that way. In a college dormitory in San Diego, teens find their friend, Jared, on his STEM chair, lifeless and covered in blood. The police chief, Andrew, then briefs the station about the discovery. They found that the two operators, Jared and the female surrogate operator, had their brains liquefied. It appears that whatever had happened to their surrogates killed them. Greer and Peters go through footage from the surrogates and see a man carrying a weapon. Greer tells Andrew that the case might be a homicide. They then get a phone call telling them that Jared is the son of surrogate pioneer Lionel Cantor. A news report reveals that Lionel is considered by many to be the father of surrogacy. He had built his company, Virtual Self Industries or VSI, into one of the biggest corporations in the world. Unfortunately, he had been ousted by his partner several years ago. Humiliated and disowned by the company he had built, Lionel had become a recluse, avoiding the public eye for almost a decade. Greer and Peters then visit Lionel. They're let in, and one of Lionel's surrogates meets them. Lionel then tells the detectives that Jared had been estranged from him since the beginning. When Jared went to college, Lionel offered him to use any of his surrogates. This was a means of bonding for the two. Peters stresses the importance of not allowing other users to borrow surrogates registered to other individuals. Greer then reiterates that they mean no offense and they're only trying to solve Jared's death. Peters' questioning angers Lionel, but Greer tries to defuse the situation, telling Lionel that he empathizes with him as he too had lost a son. Lionel pauses and calms down. Greer asks if Lionel knows of anyone who would want to harm himself or Jared. Lionel realizes that the assassination's target was him and not Jared. The assassin didn't know that the person using Lionel's surrogate was Jared. Upon realizing this, Lionel logs out of the surrogate. Lionel sits weeping in his STEM chair, knowing he inadvertently caused his son's death. Greer and Peters then head to VSI and meet with representatives. Greer asks if they know of any cases involving a surrogate's head exploding and the surrogate operator dying. The representatives become defensive and assure Greer that there are fail-safes in place to protect from such accidents. They then head to the engineering floor and meet with one of the engineers. Greer shows him the fried identity chip from Jared's surrogate, and the engineer says the only thing that could make this happen is if the circuits all fired at once. The engineer also tells them that a truckload of surrogates came from the military with optics and identity chips missing. Greer and Peters then head to a military camp and watch surrogate soldiers on the battlefield fighting a war. A surrogate gets shot and destroyed, and the operator hops right back in with a different surrogate. The military colonel assures them that any weapon used on a surrogate would not affect the surrogate's operator. He also mentions that the military typically removes motherboards and optics from surrogates for analysis. Back at the station, Peters identifies the man holding the weapon from the video footage as non-surrogate user Miles. They then head to the monitoring department, where a non-surrogate technician, Bobby, tells them Miles has been found. Greer heads up to meet with the pursuit team, while Peters stays behind with Bobby to monitor Miles' whereabouts. Bobby then tells Peters that finding Miles was easy since they have access to all the surrogates' feeds in the city. An alarm goes off, and Bobby sees a man harming a woman. He calls it in and requests an immediate shutdown of the assailant's surrogate. Bobby receives the disconnection warrant and immediately shuts the surrogates down. Peters is shocked as she didn't know surrogates could be shut down remotely and questions the procedure's legality. Bobby says it's a brand new software and shrugs Peters' concern off as the police are the good guys. Peters, however, is more concerned about the software getting into the wrong hands. Miles rides his motorcycle through the streets with police cars tailing close by. He swerves through traffic, narrowly dodging oncoming cars. Greer follows the pursuit on a helicopter. Miles then crashes into an alley and gets cornered. Police swarm him, and Miles takes out a weapon, and the pursuing officers are blasted with a wave of electricity. The police surrogates all convulse, and their eyes pop out. He then aims the device at the helicopter. Greer falls flat and disconnects from the surrogate as quickly as he can. The pilot is less fortunate, and the helicopter starts spinning out of control. Miles runs into a dread settlement, and the helicopter also starts drifting towards it. Greer gets back into his surrogate only to crash into the dread isolation zone. Greer emerges from the wreckage and starts chasing Miles. The dread inhabitants are angered seeing a surrogate has entered the zone and start chasing after Greer. Greer and Miles run through the slums, making their way through trailers. Miles tries initiating the weapon, but it is currently disabled. Greer leaps over trailers and climbs them with ease until he corners Miles. Greer demands Miles to give the weapon to him, and Miles complies, handing Greer a bag. Before Greer could open the bag, he gets blown away by a shotgun blast. Miles takes the weapon back, and a woman shoots Greer, calling him an abomination. Greer leaves his surrogate and stumbles out of his stim chair. He crawls on the floor, calling for Maggie. She quickly discovers Greer and calls an ambulance. Miles later wakes up and sees the Prophet, Powell, and his men ransacking his house, looking for the weapon. Powell asks where the weapon came from, and Miles confesses that he never found out who it was. They only kept contact through disposable cell phones, and he was only paid to use the weapon. A news report later states that Powell sees the crashed helicopter as an attack in the Dread's home and declares a revolution against surrogate users. Greer wakes up at the hospital, and Andrew tells him he's been suspended. Andrew says he'd be handling the case personally and advises Greer to rest. Infuriated by the Bureau's decision, Greer breaks out of the hospital. He's worried that the Bureau may not share his concern regarding Miles' weapon. Peters then meets with him, and they start heading back to the station. As Greer walks, he gets dizzy and disorientated. Peters says it's an effect of being in the surrogate for too long. Greer decides to head to the Dread colony, thinking he'd easily get in now that he's not using a surrogate. Inside, he sees his surrogate crucified and finds out that Miles had died. Powell speaks over Miles' funeral and reminds the attendees how Miles' death is a sign of true humanity, unlike the surrogates. Greer approaches Powell after the funeral, but Powell's henchmen beat him up after he refuses to leave. Powell recognizes Greer as a surrogate user and tells him feeling pain is as close to the human experience he'll ever get. Greer asks about the weapon, but Powell laughs at him and gives him a sarcastic answer. Greer leaves, and Powell heads into his trailer to retrieve the weapon hidden under the floor. A car pulls up behind Greer, and he gets in. A young boy speaks and reveals himself to be another one of Lionel's surrogates. Lionel says he can't use his usual surrogates because of the attempt on his life. He then expresses his frustration with how the investigation into Jareed's death is leading nowhere. Greer tells Lionel that Jareed's assassin had died, and was killed by Powell. Greer then tells Lionel how he had lost his son in a car accident and that the worst thing in the world is a parent outliving their child. Lionel advises Greer to focus his investigation on the weapon. If they find out where the weapon came from, they'd know who wanted Lionel dead. Lionel says the Dreads are incapable of producing such a weapon as it would require a lot of research and money. Greer then heads home and gets into an argument with Maggie. He says that he only wants to be with his wife, and Maggie says she is there. But Greer says he wants his real wife, not a surrogate. Maggie says things have changed and that she's not the same person. Maggie leaves Greer, enters her room, and looks at herself. She takes her goggles off and starts sobbing in her stim chair. Greer heads back to the station and finds information about VSI making a weapon contract with the military. The contract, however, is quickly terminated, but the reason is classified. Later that night, a surrogate breaks into Peters' home. It looks through recordings of what Peters has seen and learns about Bobby and the police's ability to tap into all surrogates. The surrogate then shoots a sleeping Peters several times. It then takes Peters' surrogate and implants it with a remote operator. At the station, Peters' surrogate comes to life. Greer meets with the military colonel the following day and shows a picture of the weapon. The colonel confesses that he knows of the weapon's existence and explains that it's an overload device created by VSI for the military. It was initially designed, leading to operators dying. After the testing period, all prototypes were believed to have been destroyed. Greer then tells the colonel that the Dreads have the weapon. The colonel then rushes out and tells Greer that the military will take charge of the weapon's retrieval. At the Dread Zone, Powell hands the weapon to his henchmen and tasks them to bring it to Peters at the police station. Meanwhile, Greer heads to Maggie's salon and talks to her about what happened the previous night. Maggie is surprised to see Greer and appears like she doesn't want to discuss what happened the night before. Greer brings up their dead son, and Maggie is frustrated, telling Greer that the only reason why Maggie is still alive today is because of her surrogate, which provided an escape from her life. Greer tries appealing to Maggie, but she logs out of the surrogate. At home, Maggie reaches for a bottle from a pile of medication and takes one. Meanwhile, the military has initiated an invasion of the Dread Zone to retrieve the weapon. Soldiers pour out of helicopters, and the Dread inhabitants rush to hide. Powell and his henchmen try to escape but run into the soldiers. A firefight ensues between Powell's men and the military, but Powell's men are overpowered almost immediately. Powell gets shot, and as the military approach, they see that Powell, the leader of the anti-surrogacy movement, is himself a surrogate. Lionel is finally revealed to be Powell's operator. Greer meets with who believes is Peters, and the surrogate reveals that Miles had been working with Andrew. It turns out Andrew had hired Miles to assassinate Lionel. Greer then heads into the station to confront Andrew about what he had found. Greer asks Andrew what motivated him to have Lionel killed. Greer theorizes that VSI handed Andrew the weapon. Andrew hired Miles to kill Lionel, but Miles accidentally ends up killing Jared. As Andrew looks away, Greer stabs the surrogate at the back of the head, shorting it out. He then hacks into Andrew's computer and downloads everything that had any relation to VSI and Miles. He then meets with Peter's surrogate, and they drive out. From the files, Greer surmises that Lionel is funding the anti-surrogacy movement, oblivious to the possibility that Lionel could have started the movement. Greer then finds the codes necessary to activate the weapon. Peters then calls the station, telling them of Greer's whereabouts. At that moment, a truck hits them, and the car gets thrown. Peters walks away with the weapon, but Greer decides to pursue Peters, trying to run her over. The pair end up going through busy streets, running over surrogates, and smashing into other cars. Greer ends up crashing into a store window, and Peters gets away. Greer hides from the pursuing FBI agents and steals a car. He calls Bobby and orders him to shut Peters' surrogate down, but Peters has beaten him to it. Bobby tells Greer that Peters is trying to tap into the entire surrogate network. Andrew heads to the monitoring level and faces Peters. He tries to speak with Peters, but Lionel reveals it's him controlling Peters' surrogate. Andrews reasons with Lionel, saying the surrogates are Lionel's gift to the world, and now, Lionel wants to destroy them. VSI had no choice but to have Lionel killed, as destroying the surrogates would move humanity backward. Lionel then says he only wants people to live like human beings. He then fires the weapon at Andrew, shorting out his surrogate's computer and destroying it, finally getting revenge for Jared's death. Greer arrives at Lionel's home and demands to speak with the real Lionel. He then forces his way in, trying to find Lionel. Meanwhile, Peter's surrogate initiates a virus upload into all the surrogates, intending to kill everyone who are using surrogates. Greer finds a hidden door and enters it to find Lionel's chamber. In the chamber, he finds many surrogates, including Powell and the man that killed Peters. Greer then finds Lionel sitting in a wheelchair, pointing a gun at him. Lionel asks if Greer could feel his accelerated pulse and sweating, asking if he misses being human. He says nobody knows how it feels to be human anymore, so he'll be the one to eliminate the surrogates. He argues that the people inside surrogates are already dead, so he'll be doing humanity a favor by killing all of them. He thinks surrogacy is humanity's perversion and a sick addiction. A warning rings out that the virus upload is completed. Now that his will is complete, Lionel swallows a cyanide pill, taking his own life. Greer then takes Lionel off the stim chair and logs into Peter's surrogate. He asks Bobby how they could stop the virus before it transmits, and Bobby talks him through it. With less than a second left, Greer successfully stops the transmission. The operators are safe, but the virus is still active and would still destroy surrogates. Bobby instructs Greer how to prevent the surrogates from being destroyed, while a team of operatives enters the facility. As Greer is about to confirm the virus termination, he pauses and instead decides to allow the virus to be sent to surrogates. Just as Greer presses the button, an operative shoots Peter's surrogate. As the virus goes active, all the surrogates suddenly turn lifeless. Streets and buildings pile with deactivated surrogates. Greer steps out to see the virus had successfully disabled all the surrogates. People begin leaving their houses dazed and confused, some stepping out of their houses for the first time in a while. Greer heads home and finally sees his wife standing by the window. Maggie touches Greer's face and the two embrace. News reports later state that surrogates worldwide have been deactivated, but no reports of human casualties have been listed. Humanity now stumbles back into the world, unsure of what lies ahead. Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.